Welcome to Ask Fear and Greed, where we take your questions and do our very, very best to answer them. I'm Michael Thompson, and good afternoon, Sean Aylmer.
Good afternoon, Michael.
Sean, today's question comes from Falgun. I sincerely hope, Falgun, that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. He shared it via the website. He went to fearandgreed.com.au and sent us in this note. He says, question for Ask Fear and Greed. What is your take on the shrinking ASX200 following the number of exits from big names in 2023-24? New IPOs are also not coming in at the same rate. Do you see a potential fear from overseas investors or institutional investors avoiding future investments due to concentration? What a question.
Yes.
Answered. Tick. Done.
Off we go. Thanks very much. Yes, I think it's a big problem. Great question. I mean, it's a great comment. In the last 6 months, more than 80 companies have delisted from the ASX, and most of them are pretty small. You probably haven't heard of them. Though there are others that are better known. Booktopia, Altium, Illumina. We had all those building materials companies like CSR, Boral, Adbri. They all left as well. Boat Longyear was another one. If you take a longer time frame, not just 2023-24 that Falgun's talking about, but also a bit longer, you've had like Sydney Airport, Oz Minerals, Billabong, Blackmores, Coca-Cola Amatil, Costa Group, Crown Resorts, Estia Health, Invacare, Leighton Simic was another big one, Link Group, Oil Search was a big one, Pendle, Virgin Australia, of course, and then Westfield was broken up, and so the international parts of Westfield effectively left the local bourse. Others, like Newcrest Mining and Afterpay, actually the international parts of Westfield probably fits into this one as well, they've become parts of larger corporations, and the buyers have maintained a secondary listing on the ASX. So in the case of Afterpay, it's Block. In the case of Newcrest Mining, it's Newmont. But investors aren't really investing in the Australian company anymore. It's more the parent company. So we've had all those companies leave, right?
That's a big list. And they are some, I know that you mentioned there's a lot of smaller ones, but those are some big companies and such well-known names.
Yeah. I mean, Virgin, Coca-Cola Amatil, Oz Minerals, Sydney Airport, CSR, like these are really big players. They were big players. Problem is, of course, we haven't had anywhere near enough floats to replace the old companies. The only real float of note this year has been Guzman y Gomez. So what's it mean for institutional and local investors as well as international investors? Some fund mandates, so the institutions, our super funds, for example, I put money into my super fund. I might say, I want to buy Aussie shares. Thing is, there's this growing amount of money chasing a limited number of companies. Now, that growing amount of money is in large part thanks to mandated superannuation. More money chasing fewer stocks, that puts upward pressure on prices. That's even if the fundamentals of a company don't quite suggest that shares should trade as high as they are. Maybe Commonwealth Bank is an example of that. All the analysts think it's overpriced at the moment, but it just keeps going. International investors, well, they tend to want bigger companies. And unfortunately, when you lose the Coca-Cola Amatils and the Sydney Airports and the Oz Minerals, we just don't have that many big companies anymore. I think of the S&P 500. The smallest stock on the S&P 500 is worth about 8.4 billion Aussie dollars. That's in terms of market cap. Mm-hmm. Now, there are only about 60 local companies that make that cutoff point. But if you're an international investor, you think, let's go to Australia, you're kind of looking for a big company. You want one with strategic benefits. So banks are the obvious example there. Resource stocks are another one. Plus a handful of companies like CSL, which makes most of its money in the US anyway, Goodman Group, WiseTech Global. But there's only like 10, maybe 20 serious options for international investors. That's not exactly a surplus of choice, to Falgun's point here.
No. How do we actually fix this in terms of, is there a fix in terms of getting more into the IPO pipeline in order to improve the options that are out there, particularly when you're talking about some of those, the size of the companies on Wall Street, that if we're looking at any of the big companies like Canva, for instance, there's no way in the world it's going to list here in Australia. It's going to go straight over to the US, isn't it? Just because of the size of the market is so much bigger.
Totally. And the problem for any large company listing here is that the depth or the amount of money in the market here is very small compared to Wall Street. So they can go and raise money in Wall Street much easier. So Canva is the great example. It's listing on Wall Street, not locally, even though it is a local company. Mind you, we have had the buy now, pay later sector in particular has had a bunch of US companies listing in Australia because it's people in Australia or investors in Australia just understand the buy now, pay later area better than US investors, and therefore they've been able to raise money easier here. But generally, it's the other way around. And if you're an international investor, you're basically looking in banks, resource companies, and a couple of others. That's about it. The lack of stocks is also a problem for local investors simply because it's just going to be pushing up the prices. Whatever the fundamentals say, if there's this weight of money coming in, it does push up the price, but then you can be overpaying for something. So when you get, what we've had since COVID is a lot more volatility in the market. So the good news has sent the share price up more. The bad news has sent the share price down more. I don't think that's going to be unusual in coming years because of the lack of depth of the companies in Australia. So I do think it's going to become a more volatile market. And I think it is a problem for local institutional investors, local retail investors, and definitely for international investors.
Wow. So really not a lot of good news there for Falgun, is there?
Well, if you get onto the right stocks, if you got into Commonwealth Bank 12 months ago, it's up 40% over the last 12 months. Westpac's up 50%, right? So if you just only have your investment horizon as the top 15 stocks, let's say, and you think BHP's the one to go, well, you've been in all sorts. If you thought WiseTech Global was the way to go, well, you've done incredibly well, or any of the big four banks. So I do think that lack of diversity does come to bite you eventually, because the banks will turn. They've had a great run, but at some point things won't go so well, and then your market is going to underperform. But yeah, I mean, the US has the same problem with the Magnificent Seven tech stocks, though. It's dominated by those big guys, and so it has the same issue as the Australian market does. In the UK, it's huge resources index, the FTSE.
Right.
And then financial services as well in parts of Europe. So we're not alone in this challenge.
Do you giggle every time you say footsie? Is it like just playing it under the table? Yeah.
I don't, but you do.
Yeah, I do. Someone has to. 50% of us laugh at it.
Yeah, that's right.
Look, of course, we're not an investing podcast. I think I demonstrated that with that last remark. And it is definitely advisable to go and speak to a professional before making investment decisions. But Falgun, I do hope that we've answered your question. I feel like, Sean, you've done an admirable job of going through some of those challenges. Not a great deal of good news there for Falgun, but hopefully plenty of stuff to make you think.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Falgun, for the question, and thank you, Sean, for answering it.
Thank you, Michael.
Remember, if you have something that you would like to know, then please send through your question on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or do what Falgun did and head to fearandgreed.com.au and send it on through there, and we'll pop it on the list. I'm Michael Thompson, and this is Ask Fear and Greed.